Hello, everybody. Well, thanks for having me here today. I'm going to talk to you a bit about the life cycle of dragonflies from egg through the various different larval instars to metamorphosis and when they emerge as an imago, an adult. Um, I've been interested in dragonflies, larvae especially, since I was quite small. I was very, very fortunate as a young boy to be taken fishing a lot by my grandfather in the early 1960s. And we were often by a pond, a river, a stream, a lake, or a canal. And dragonflies during the spring and the summer months would always be part of the landscape. They'd always be there. And I just found them wonderful, beautiful living works of art at the time. I didn't know very much about them at all. And it took quite a few years until I got to secondary school. And I was very lucky to have a biology master that would go the extra mile with you if you wanted and taught me a lot about the biology of dragonflies and dragonfly larvae. Um, so from that point onwards, from the age of 13, 14, rather than keep tropical fish, I'd sooner keep dragonfly larvae. I used to find them really, really interesting. And we were very fortunate in our school to have an area called the Sanctuary that had a pond on it that had various species in it. It didn't have too many at the time, if I remember correctly, but there were enough species to get you started. Dragonflies and true dragonflies and damselflies. So today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about dragonflies, dragonfly larvae, how it all works, and try and encourage people, if I can, to breed larvae at home themselves and study their habits. Because by doing this, you can actually learn a lot about how they exist out in the natural world and what we need to do to help them in their environment, to help them have a steady, stable environment to live in and a successful environment to live in. Because some dragonflies are what we would call habitat specific, others are generalist and they don't mind anything really. And it just depends on the species. So, again, when I was at school, I was very fortunate to see this poem by Alfred Lord Tennyson, which I found really inspiring at the time. And I'm sure most of you have read this poem because it occurs in many Dragonfly books these days, not necessarily the whole poem, but some parts of it. And there were certain aspects about it that used to well, I used to find a bit odd. I could not quite understand what an old husk was from head to tail, for example. I didn't realize that that would be the exuvia. Now you can see in this picture here um, a tenorol, and you can see the exuvia on the reed right next to it there. So this is what we look for when we're out in the natural world, primarily the exuvia, because the exuvia give you a true indication as to what species and how many of that particular species are emerging from the water body that you're surveying, be it a pond, a side of a canal, a stream, or anything like that. So I would say that collecting exuvia, or not necessarily collecting them, but going out and counting the exuvia is a really good thing to do. Albeit sometimes it's not always easy to access the places where the exuvia are. Sometimes they can be on the inside of the reeds in the vegetation going quite a way out into the pond. And it's very difficult to physically get out there unless you've got a rubber dinghy or something to go round the pond and actually find the numbers of exuvia that there are. Again, a lot of this does depend on species. Different species can do different things. Different, some species I know will actually come out of a pond and go across a path and emerge on bushes and grass 6 feet away from the pond, sometimes up into trees. It's all species dependent. But collecting exuvia, I can't say enough how that really does say what and how many species are emerging from a particular water body. Because in the spring and the summer, you can be walking around an area surveying dragonflies, and you'll see a lot of true dragonflies maybe, and some may not have even have emerged from that water body that you're by. They could have come from other ponds and other areas far distant. Right, so I'll now go over to various different types of larvae. Here I'm concentrating primarily on what we call true dragonflies. Now, at this present time, I've got 17 species which I'm breeding at my house at home at the moment. And I've been very successful in doing this, and I'll explain to people later on how you can do it yourself if you want to study the species at home. I've probably done most of the British species. I haven't done the azure hawker, and I haven't done lunulatum, the Irish damselfly yet, but that's going to happen this year. But I have done most of the British species since I was probably 14 years old. Some of which don't exist in the areas that I originally caught them back in the day. So here we see some typical larvae, some typical dragonfly larvae, and I'll go through these with you and explain what they are. But before I do that, just a little bit about the life cycle, really. Now, dragonflies, as most of you probably know, can oviposit in one of two, well, there are three different ways, really, but we get to know it as two different ways, exophytic and endophytic. They either oviposit in plant material, or they just drop their eggs into a water body. And the ones that oviposit into plant material are more ancient species, and they're species that have what's known as a true ovipositor, a device at the end of their abdomen that literally can carve into the vegetation and deposit an egg, or sometimes several eggs at a time, maybe 3 at a time in different directions, depending on the species. So yeah, so we have the two different ways of laying eggs. The eggs that are laid in plant material tend to be more elongated, and the ones that tend to be just dropped into water bodies are generally more circular in their description. So the ones that oviposit into plants and material like that, reeds, plants, weeds, vegetation, are literally all of our damselflies and the aeschnids. All of our other true dragonflies deposit eggs into the water body. So they're more, things like our libellulids are more of what we class as modern species, really. So a dragonfly will lay, a female dragonfly will oviposit, say, her egg into a plant, a reed. So let's take, for example, a southern hawker. That seems to be a popular one today because there was a lady who found several in a pond earlier on in Oxfordshire. So a southern hawker will oviposit into plant material. Within, depending on temperature, within 4 to 5 weeks, that egg will hatch. The inside the egg, what tends to happen is the embryo develops what's known as a cephalic heart, a little heart that pumps its head and up larger than it usually is. It literally expands an area above its head, and it pops open what's known as the pedicel at the end of the egg. And then the larva slips out of the egg, and it's known as a prolarva at that time. And it's encased in a little membrane. All of his legs and even the labium can be seen at this point are encased in a membrane. Depending on the species, it can take seconds, sometimes a few minutes, to then go through ecdysis, which is the change from the prolarva into the second, what we call the second instar. which would be the next stage on. And then you would truly recognize it as a very, very, very miniature dragonfly larva. Now, when dragonfly larvae have emerged like this, they're very, very similar to the large larval forms in a lot of respects. The only difference is when they first emerge, they only have three sections to their antennae. And then with each ecdysis, the antennae increase in length up to the fifth ecdysis, where they become usually seven segmented, sometimes six segmented, and only four segmented. They're in my favourite at the moment, which is the Gomphus vulgatissimus, the clubtail. So most other larvae, be it damselfly or dragonfly, have three segmented antennae initially. Now, they grow through a series of what are known as instars or stages that they go through. Now, if you breed these insects from a single female, it's proven, and I know this for a fact, that a female that gives birth to larvae, those larvae can sometimes go through a different amount of instars before they metamorphosize at the end in their final one. So some might go through 9 or 10, some might go through 11 or 12 instars, and they've all come from exactly the same parent. So the length of time that it takes is variable, to be honest. And this is true if you keep them in exactly the same temperature and the same environment. I don't actually know the answer to that, why that would be, but only to know that some take longer than others. I think personally, I think it does depend a little bit on diet, because you find that with some dragonfly larvae, if they don't eat enough before ecdysis, they pass on because they can't go through that process of shedding their skin. They literally shed their skin at ecdysis. It's like a very thin skin that they come out of and then move on to their next instar. But you often find if they don't eat very well up until that point, they find it very hard to go through that process. And a lot of them lose their life at that point. I think I've explained quite a bit there about larvae in their early stages. Going back to my pictures that I have here to show you, we can see, as I'm looking at this screen, it would be on my right hand side. At the top, we have our hairy dragonfly, which is the one that everybody's hoping is going to be emerging today in this lovely sunny weather. And it certainly will be emerging soon, because up here where I live on the Avalon Marshes, there are quite a few peeping out at the moment, thinking about it. So it's within the next week or so, maybe week and a half, I think some of these will be emerging. In fact, I've already had one emerge, but we're not going to count that one because it's in my house. So that's neither here nor there. But you can see with with these particular larvae, um, the we've got the hairy dragonfly there. The way you can identify it quite easily is the fact it's the only aeschnid. It's a different genus to all the others. It's got much smaller eyes. You can see the eyes in the larva are a lot more smaller than they are in the other ones that we have here. If you look below, we have a brown hawker that's not very brown. It's usually got stripes on the side, but this one hasn't, and it's come from the same parent as all my other ones. So I can't really explain the fact that this one hasn't got the stripes on it, but you can see the eyes on the brown hawker are slightly larger than the eyes on the hairy. If we had an emperor in there, it would have hugely bulbous eyes, much larger. Going across to the left-hand side, these are four-spot chasers, and these have all come from the same parent as well. They've all come from the same mother. All these all of these larvae that you see here have been collected from the wild. I've literally gone out, followed the females around until they've oviposited and brought the eggs back home to hatch the eggs. It can be quite a time-consuming business doing that, but it's well worthwhile to see it happen. And you can see the difference between the shapes of these larvae. The ones on the left, the four-spot chasers, tend to spend most of their time under leaf matter and a bit of detritus. They don't tend to burrow quite as deep as our clubtails or our golden rings, but they still remain hidden a lot more than the Aeschynids do. The Aeschynids tend to be up in the water a lot more.
John, I'm not
Yeah,
sure that your presentation pictures are keeping up. It's still showing crawlers and sprawlers.
it's still showing. Oh, that's okay. I haven't moved on yet.
Okay,
I'm moving on now.
good.
Right, here we have one of my favorites, actually. This is one of my favorites at the moment, and this is because of Steve Cam's idea that we reintroduce the clubtail dragonfly back to the overwater, back in the New Forest, where it was once resident many years ago. In fact, I can remember it being resident there because going back to what I said earlier about going out and watching dragonflies fishing. I used to spend a lot of time down in Hampshire fishing, and the clubtail used to be quite prevalent, and that would be 1964, 65, that kind of time, I think, if I remember correctly. So in this picture here, these are my clubtail larvae. These are from Goring on Thames, and these myself, Steve Cam, we were there catching these larvae this year to see if that I could to see if I could still breed them at home, because I have bred them in the past, but not for a long time. The clubtail hasn't been one that I've done for quite some time, so it was interesting to see whether I could still breed them at home. And yes, I can still breed them. They're doing very well. I've actually augmented these ones with some from the Severn as well that I've got from the River Severn recently. So I've got quite a few clubtails now doing very well. And you can see in this picture how up on the right hand side, you can see the clubtail when it's removed from its substrate, from the detritus and the sand and the pebbles on the bottom. This is a bit like I've tried to replicate the River Severn here, and you can see that's the clubtail on the surface of the substrate, and then you can see how if you go over to the right hand side at the top, he's burrowing in there. And then further down, he's almost disappearing. Eventually, I couldn't get enough pictures, but they do eventually disappear. They always burrow head first. And I did a little bit of close observation myself. And Steve Cam, came up with a question last year about a spine, a spike on I think it's the foreleg of the clubtail. And judging by what I've noticed, they use their forelegs because they've only got two tarsi on the forelegs and the middle legs. They haven't got three like all the other dragonfly larvae. Their legs are much more robust, and they literally burrow in with their legs. And I think that spine aids in moving the sand and the sediment out of the way as they burrow. They also use their antennae. Their antennae are very short, four segmented. They also use those to help as well. I literally sat with them for hours watching and watching, trying to work out how they were doing it. And that's literally how they do it. And literally they'll burrow in, and all you'll see are their eyes and their rear end projecting from the actual sand to take in the air. So there we have a picture of some successful clubtails at home at the moment. Right. As regards feeding, you can feed dragonfly larvae on from their first instar, the second instar, I mean, on their first instar, they tend to eat egg yolk, which is contained within their body. They still have in their mid gut egg yolk, which they can survive on for some time. But after the third instar, they need to start feeding and using their labium properly. So, for those that have never seen a dragonfly munching its prey, we managed to get a picture here. Sadly, the actual extension of the labium, the speed of it, I wasn't able to capture that to show you the sheer speed. But they use muscles in their fourth and fifth segment of their abdomen to literally power out the labium to catch their prey. And then they catch it on two palps which have got hooks on the end that literally embed themselves into the prey. They withdraw the labium back to their mouth parts and then they start munching it up with their mandibles. Now, I'll move this on and you'll see this in action. Now we can see here, this is an emperor here. His mate, who's at his rear end, didn't get a look in on it. And you can see the blood literally dripping from the bloodworm. One interesting fact is they always eat a little bit of vegetation. You'll notice at this point that the vegetation that's stuck on the bloodworm will be eaten as well. There it goes. So they could be a bit herbivore. They could be herbivores. No, they do eat a bit of vegetation every now and again. They don't discard it. They take it in. And there we can see he's cleaning he's using his, what are known as his palps there to clean his mouth parts. So there we go. That's an example of an emperor larva just eating a bloodworm. Bloodworms are what I feed them on primarily, to be honest. A lot of the true dragonfly larvae, and they can eat small bloodworms right the way through to large bloodworms, depending on their size, right the way through until metamorphosis, and they always emerge perfectly fine, a perfectly good size. They're not reduced in size in any way. If you feed them on a variety of food, which I also do, because I'm very fortunate to have some ponds in my garden where I can get all different types of invertebrates, right up to tadpoles and sticklebacks for the final instars of the emperors. You find that they still emerge exactly the same. I've found through my own experience, if you feed them bloodworms all the way through, they'll emerge perfectly fine. If you feed them a mixed diet, they'll also emerge perfectly fine without any real difference in size. Sometimes some will be a little bit bigger than others, maybe, but no major differences. You don't get stunted ones or anything like that, keeping them on the same diet. With damselfly larvae, because I haven't really mentioned those so much at the moment, with damselfly larvae, I'm raising up quite a few species of those at the moment, and they're mainly fed initially on Daphnia. I feed them on Daphnia and very, very small bloodworms and tubifex worms. And they tend to survive really, really, really well on those as well. And they're very similar to the true dragonfly, to true dragonflies, in as much as they you could feed them on exactly the same thing and they do perfectly fine, or you can give them a mixed diet and they seem to do perfectly fine. Right, here we have some example. Here we have an example going back to counting and collecting exuvia. I did mention this a bit at the beginning, and it's definitely a place to start when you're actually going around doing your surveys around ponds, lakes, canals, and streams. But obviously, health and safety these days, it's not like the old days where we just got our waders on and just got into the river and walked in along the rushes getting the exuvia, or got into the pond. People are a bit more reluctant to do this kind of thing these days, but it's a good idea to try and collect as many as you can or try and find as many as you can because, as I said earlier on, it really does help with knowing what species are emerging and how many of that particular species are emerging from that particular water body. And all you're looking for those that have never done this, because I realize I'm talking to some experienced people here and maybe some people that are maybe not so experienced. So for the not so experienced people, you're just looking for the larval case. It's like a little suit of armor that stays on the emergent vegetation around the pond. But don't just restrict yourself to the pond or the stream. Go inland slightly. Always go inland from the pond and the stream. Lots of damselflies will actually emerge in grassy areas as well. They don't just come out of the water body and emerge right there at the side of the water body. Some can be further away from the water body, and you might find different species like that. So this is the kind of thing you're looking for. Obviously, damselfly exuvia are a lot smaller, a lot more transparent, depending on the species, a little bit harder to find. But once you get your eye in on it, it's not too bad. I can still find them now. My eyesight is really not as good as it used to be. But as long as you can focus in there and as long as you've got time as well, it takes time to do these things. It's not something you can just go around walking. You've got to really get in there and look for these things. And this is an example of myself going out looking for larvae actually on various water bodies on the Somerset levels. I often take people out and show them where the living larvae live. And it's something you can do in the winter months because everybody, well, I know the common data goes quite a way into November sometimes, and maybe some migrant hawkers. But from November onwards up until March, most people are thinking, what can I do as regards dragonflies or anything to do with dragonflies? Well, you can go out into a water body any of those months and you can find larvae. I mean, I've even gone out when there's been ice in the margins of some of these ponds and lakes and still found the larvae quite close in, even though you would think that they might go into deeper water. Some of the ponds that they live in aren't that deep anyway, so they haven't really got very far to go, but they tend to get deeper into the vegetation in the colder weather. But you can see here, this is how you would go out and collect larvae. You can go to a pond and you can root around in the vegetation at the side of the pond with a net, and often you'll come up with various different species. And you can go. I'm on a canal here in on the right hand side, and I'm digging a lot deeper down there, right down to the bottom of the canal. And you come up with loads of species doing this. I think I had 4 or 5 species that day from the canal, and about 3 or 4 from the pond. It was quite a cold day then. But it's a good thing that you can do, and you can get the larva, and you can have a larva identification book with you. I think Dave Smallshire does a book at the moment that's got some larva ID in the back, and also Steve Cam's got a brilliant book on exuvia and larva, which are really good little reference guides for you. And you can be armed with these books and a net and see what you can find. I tend to not take a tray with me. A lot of people walk around with trays and things like that and put everything in the tray and see what they find. I tend to just have a particular type of net that the larva can't escape from, be it small or large larva. And I tend to just jostle around in the net and find the larva and just literally get them in my hand and find what species they are. But it's a great activity that gets you out of the house in the winter, looking for the different larvae, and it's good to be able to identify them. And again, you can see what species are breeding in those particular water bodies. Just another picture of me showing how I lift the net up, have a little look in there, and then you can see all the detritus that's in my net there. I just literally sift that with my fingers. And even in the colder months, even though they're a bit more soporific, the larger dragonflies are still move around a little bit, so you'll see them quite easily. The damselfly is not so easy, but you've just got to sift it a little bit, and they'll make themselves known. You can see that net that I've got there is quite a lightweight one. It will do for all types of dragonfly larvae. I can't really cope with the really heavy nets. The only time that you really need a heavy net, and the best one that I've ever come across, is one that was devised by Steve Cam actually for dredging the Thames. And that's the only time you'd need one if you're looking for club tails, and you've literally got to get into into the sand and the pebbles at the bottom, because this kind of net wouldn't be strong enough for that. But for anything else, a net like this is ideal, because even though the holes are relatively large, the larvae don't fall through because the water forms like a meniscus, like you'd get on the top of a water body. So the larvae just stick in the net, really. They're dead easy to find like that. There we go. Voila. So we had a little emperor there. Well, not such a little emperor, to be honest. So that was what I found there, just to show you. And they don't fall through the holes or anything, and you can pretty much identify that just by holding it, as long as you've got your identification guide, if that's what you need. Right, as regards rearing larvae, I've reared larvae now, and I know quite a few other people have reared various species of larvae. I don't know what success people have had. It seems to be quite variable depending on what species they were um, raising. Now, you don't really need anything more than a large lunchbox. You don't need to go out and buy a big fish tank or anything like that. If you want to replicate a fantastic underwater scene with lots of reeds and detritus on the bottom, maybe stones and pebbles, well, yeah, then you could have a big tank. But you're not going to really see much very easily, because they're going to be hiding away in various places, and it's going to be very difficult to kind of monitor what's going on. So what I tend to do, and what I've done for donkeys now, is literally breed them in lunch boxes. Now, at my house, I have probably a 40 or 50 of these going at the moment, quite a few indoors and quite a few outdoors, and quite a few in an outbuilding that I've got as well. And I put different species in different containers so that I can monitor them. And it can be a little bit labor intensive when you're doing so many, because you have to change the water, preferably with rainwater or water from a pond that you may have in your garden, rather than tap water, pretty much every week. If you change the water every week, you can literally bring the larva up in this type of lunchbox from its egg all the way through the instars to the imago, to the adult. When they emerge, when they're ready to emerge, I just put little reeds we put reeds in the corners of each box, so they've got some emergent vegetation to climb up on. But until that time, there's no real point. You don't need any emergent vegetation at all. And you can also keep them in a lunchbox without any substrate at all. So without anything on the bottom. I've raised them up many times without any stones, any detritus, anything. And that's true of chasers, skimmers, darters. They'll live in that perfectly fine. And of course, all the aeshnids and the damselflies, they like to be up in the weed anyway, because they're like crawlers. They tend to like to hunt around in the weed for their prey. So they like to be in the weed. So yeah, you can keep all species of dragonfly larvae right the way through in quite minimal conditions, really. And they'll be perfectly fine as long as you change their water and as long as you feed them. I've put a little box of large bloodworms up the top there, in the right hand corner. They're the kind of bloodworms that I feed them. And you can feed them, how often you feed them is up to you. But they usually can go, I would say an emperor can go approximately 2 or 3 months without feeding at all. So if you don't give it any food at all for that length of time, it will not come to any harm. But it won't go through any, it'll remain smaller. It won't go through any ecdysis. But if you start to feed it, it'll start munching a lot. They tend to they tend to eat more if you starve. The more you starve them, the bigger meal they'll have. The more you feed them, the less they'll eat. So if they've got a constant supply of food, they just munch gradually. If you starve them for a while, if you don't give them much food at all, and then start putting the food in, they'll eat 4 or 5 bloodworms in one go. That's an emperor. The things like the chasers, the darters, and the skimmers, they tend to eat smaller prey due to the fact that the design of their labium. I don't think I mentioned the labium, did I? There's several types really. We've got the underslung labium, which is what all of our damselflies have, and our aschnids. They tend to have the underslung labium, which tends to be literally underslung beneath the head and fires out like an arm from your elbow like this. Whereas all the libellulids and the cordulids, all have the big, what I call a mask, or what is known as a mask, because it literally is a mask across their face. So their palps are absolutely huge across their face, and they tend to eat smaller prey because of that. They can't cope with such bigger prey. So that gives you an example of how I rear larvae at home. And anybody can do this. You don't need to go to the extremes that I go, because it's really a good idea just to take one species at a time and just really learn that species and see how it develops and how it grows and how long it takes. You can do lots of experiments with them as well. You can keep them indoors, you can warm them up, heat them up, you can cool them down, and so you can stall their development or you can increase their development. An emperor in this country usually takes about 2 years to go through to metamorphosis, but they can go 1 year. There are a lot who'll do 1 year, but you can get them to do it in 6 months as well. Emperors if you go down into southern Europe, it's southern Italy, Iberian Peninsula in particular, where I've spent a lot of time with them, and also Greece, where I'm also spending a lot of time now. You find that they go through their stages much quicker than they do here. So if I just move on again, that just gives you an example of part of where I live. This is my garden, and you can see I'm very fortunate. That's one pond there that I use for various species. I have a couple of ponds, and I've also got a running stream where I can do my demoiselles and my whitelegs. So I'm very fortunate to have that running water. If you keep white-leg damselflies as larvae, if you keep demoiselles, you do have to make sure that the water circulates even in a lunchbox. So you can keep them in a lunchbox as well, but you need an aerator pump and you need to have the water moving around them. The whitelegs can tolerate still water more than the demoiselles can. So you will find that the white-leg damselflies won't mind too much if it remains still. But I'm very fortunate to have a stream running. It runs around my house like that. It's a good source of fresh water, and it's a good place for breeding riverine species. So we're very lucky. I mean, we chose a house because of that, to be honest. But if you're not fortunate enough to have that, it's really not a problem. You can live in a council flat, as I did as a kid, and literally bring up damselflies and dragonflies in lunch boxes and various aquaria. I used to use the old angle iron aquaria way back in the day when aquaria used to have angle iron and glass like that, very small ones. And that was perfectly adequate. I think it's a good idea when if you want to breed these at home, to just do one at a time, really, rather than try too many species. Because if you really get to know a species, you really can understand it out in its natural world as well by watching it and how it works at home when you've got it in a captive environment. So yeah, it's definitely a worthwhile thing to do because so many of us spend so much time on the adults. And when you think they're only in that stage for a very short time just to feed and reproduce, and then they're in their larval stage for such a long time. And it's so important that we maintain their habitat that they live in. One thing that Steve hit on earlier on was about things like fairy wasps. You often find with damselfly and dragonfly eggs, if you collect them in the wild, you need to follow the females and get them on the day because otherwise they can have parasites pretty much take out most of the eggs. I found some willow emeralds here this year, and they've all been parasitized by fairy wasps. And there's probably about six that I've got in a twig that are still okay, and the rest of them are just not. They've just been parasitized. So parasites do play a big part in depletion of eggs. Depending whether they get parasitized or not. And there are lots of various types. Um, Another thing that stops damselflies emerging is algae. You find there's a type of algae that's filamentous algae that if you get it in your pond, you can literally put a stick in and twist it around the pond. Loads of it can come out in the early parts of the year. And sometimes, if damselflies get trapped beneath that, they can't emerge. They get stuck in it. And many times, I've found lots and lots and lots of dead damselfly larvae in algae where they cannot literally get through it. They get stuck in the algae and they cannot navigate their way through it. And that can be detrimental to damselflies. Dragonflies, not so much. They're more robust and they can kind of find other ways to go. Plus, they've got their little jet propulsion that they can use to zoom to another part of the pond or lake where there may not be so much algae. Um, I don't think I mentioned the jet propulsion, did I? I don't. I think for those that don't know, most true dragonflies breathe through their rectum when they're in the water. They breathe through, they've got an anal pyramid, and then it goes into what's known as a branchial basket, which is a series of gills in their rear end where they take in the water, subtract the oxygen into their trachea, and then expel the water afterwards. And sometimes when they expel that water, if they feel a little bit in danger, or maybe you frighten them sometimes, they literally use jet propulsion. They'll expel the water and power themselves through with their legs along their sides. Damselflies can't do that, of course, because they all have they have what's known as caudal lamella, which are they're like protuberances at their rear end that they take in oxygen through those. But damselflies, you can keep a damselfly for ages without any lamella. If you grab the lamella with tweezers, they've got what's called a breaking joint at the end of the lamella. The lamella will just come off. You can take the lamella off of a damselfly, all three lamella, and it will survive. It takes in oxygen through its skin and it will survive like that. It can't take in oxygen through spiracles because the spiracles are closed off until emergence. But it literally takes oxygen through its skin. The dragonfly can do that up to a point, but they've got a better system really with their branchial basket. That's their the gills in their rear end that they use. It's interesting, really, because we firmly believe that most dragonflies and damselflies originally, if you go back to what would be called the Permian period in the fossil record, we think that most dragonflies and damselflies larvae were terrestrial and they weren't amphibiotic creatures at all. They were actual terrestrial larvae, a bit like the petalourids that we have now in Australia. They still are like that, and they are an ancient species. And their larvae still live in burrows in soggy soil at the side of bogs, and they stay in the burrows for up to 10 years. The petalourids, and we think that dragonflies originally were terrestrial insects totally, and that they became aquatic as time moved on and developed these different breathing mechanisms, i.e., the branchial basket in the true dragonfly and the caudal lamella in the damselfly that you see. Very really interesting, really. I mean, if climate change goes the way it does, I mean, I think the libellulids don't mind our darters, our red vein darters, they don't mind ephemeral ponds and things like that because their life cycle is very quick. But some dragonflies, true dragonflies like the Aeschynids, they may go back to being terrestrial again one day. No, who knows how things are going to develop in the future. Um, if I just move on here, if you keep dragonflies for any length of time, they do become family pets and family friends, as you can see here. And sometimes it's very hard when they finally emerge to let them go. But you can be assured that every single dragonfly and damselfly that I rear, I let them go back into the wild again. And it's probably quite good. Probably more of them survive by myself breeding them at home than they would in the wild because they'd probably be predated upon or parasitized, or somebody would do something to the water body to kill them off. Anything might happen. So the ones that emerge at my house, they're guaranteed to survive really to an adult stage. And they literally do become family members. And here we can see a little cartoon that I've put on here showing what's probably going on under the water bodies at the moment. So they're all getting ready to go up, and all of our probably large reds, damselflies, and our hairy dragonflies. I like spring hawker for hairy dragonfly. I've never really been keen on hairy dragonfly, to be honest. I much prefer spring hawker for it. They're all sitting there thinking who's going to be the first up and which which human being is going to be the first to record me. So there we go. So I think I've pretty much covered everything I possibly can on damselflies that I can think of. I must say that there is, I don't know if you can see me. Can you see me in this picture? But there is a book that I got way back, and I did show it to Dave Smallshire a few weeks ago.
We can see you.
Can you see this book?
If you, yep.
It's a book called David a Dragonfly by Cecily Rutley. And if this was reprinted for children, they would want to go out collecting exuvia from the age of 5 and going out collecting larvae because it literally has in it the most fantastic pictures of exuvia and larvae. And you even get to know that adult dragonflies have 5 eyes. They're 2 compounds and they're 3 ocelli. So it's a fantastic book. If it was reprinted, I think it was printed in 1950. But this one I got it's in the 60s. There was quite a few of them made. But they're fantastic little things for getting kids interested. And there's not really enough of that kind of thing around anymore. And another good thing would be if parents took their kids out fishing, because if they just go out onto riverbanks and sit there in the summer from 4 in the morning until 5 in the evening, they really will see lots of dragonfly activity. They really will get into it. And again, like Steve Cam said earlier on, it was true what he said about downy emeralds. You go out early in the morning, you'll see a lot of them if they're in that vicinity, but later on during the day, not so many. And this is the thing about recording them as well. You've literally got to know when that species is more prevalent, really, to get the right numbers. So I think there we go then.